All right, we'll go ahead and get rolling here. We might have some more folks trickling in, but we've got a good crowd already, and it's a couple minutes after. I know everyone's busy gearing up for the holidays, doing all of your last minute work tasks so you can get on to your last minute shopping and off wherever you're going for the holidays. But thought given where we're at right now in terms of an election that just occurred, new administration coming in with some pretty ambitious and loudly stated positions on international trade that will likely have an impact on our industry. New Congress coming in, that this would be an ideal time for us to huddle up and share some of the expertise that our firm that we just began working with a few months ago, Sorini, Samet Associates, which specializes in international trade, would share with us, not just specializing in international trade, but Ron and his team also have been working with several clients over the years, including some ASA members, others in the outdoor recreation industry. So have a pretty specialized niche in international trade, outdoor recreation that is well suited for helping us at ASA on the variety of topics that we'll begin discussing here today. Before we jump in, before I turn it over to Ron and Megan, we'll just ask everyone again, make sure your microphone's muted. If you want to turn your screen off, that might help a little bit with bandwidth. But we will do Q&A at the end. Ron and Megan have some slides that they're going to run through, covering sort of the current state of play, what to expect over the coming years. Get a little bit of feedback from someone if everyone can make sure their mics are muted. We will do Q&A at the end again. If you have a question at the end, you can either type it in the chat. You can do that at any point, or use the raise hand function. Your screen hopefully looks something roughly similar to what you see on the screen right here. So there's an option to share your screen, to raise your hand. Otherwise, with that, I think we can go ahead and launch into the presentation. And again, Ron and Megan will have a bunch of slides to run through. We'll come back for Q&A. I might touch on a few other specific topics that we have been working with Ron and team on in terms of some excise tax de minimis issues. But without further ado, Megan, assuming you are going to launch through the slides, hopefully you've got access to do so. So I'll stop sharing and let you try.
Yes, let me double check.
While Megan's taking that out, Mike, thank you, and to everyone participating for the opportunity to work for you. It's been a great, I think, 2 months, Mike, since we started working with you, and we've already done a number of meetings on the Hill, and I think starting to move the agenda forward. And so we're looking forward to some great successes in 2025. Megan's a bit under the weather, so I'm going to tee things off, turn it over to her. But if she starts coughing, I will jump in and take over. Megan, why don't you go to the...
Yeah, I'm trying. It's going into this weird mode. Let me change my screen. Hold on. This is why when you work in Teams normally and then you go to Zoom, it doesn't work very well. Resume. All right, let me try this again. Hold on. And Mike, you have it in your email too, in case I can't do this, correct?
Well, we're going to be walking through several things. You know, obviously tariffs is on everyone's minds. And we'll, walk through what the options are for the administration, how we see things kicking off on January 20th when the president's inaugurated, go through some of the changes that are occurring in Congress, how that will impact the trade agenda, and then just kind of wrap things up with an overall policy impact. So Megan,
you guys can see this now, right?
I thought, by the way, Megan was very creative with the opening slide with the fish and the hook in the mouth. So
I was going to ask about that. That is pretty impressive. I want to know what program you used to do that.
It was like wordscramble.com or something like that. And the hook just came.
Why don't you go to the third slide? I've kind of already described what we're going to touch on.
So here's just kind of our agenda today, by the way. That's how we're going to walk through things.
Right, I think I've already addressed that. So, you know we're in for a wild ride. We know the president's going to be very focused on trade. It's interesting. We had a conversation not long ago with Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, who cares about trade, but taxes are his really, the issue he wants to focus on early in 2025. It's going to be a big year on taxes, but he talks to the president quite frequently, and he says every time he talks to President Trump, he wants to talk about taxes, and the president shuts him down and wants to talk about trade, and reiterates that tariffs is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. So he's serious about that, and so we expect, as I said, a wild ride. And one of the telling things was the comments that the president-elect has made about Bob Lighthizer, who was the U.S. trade representative in the first Trump administration. I don't think there's anyone out there in Congress or private sector that would call Bob lighthearted or timid or shy about taking trade initiatives. But, as you see on the slide, the president-elect said he's bypassed Bob Lighthizer, the cabinet, because he thought he was afraid to go too big. So that, I think, tells you right up front that it's going to be and even more aggressive probably than the first term on tariffs. So, Megan, you want to go to the next slide?
Trying to at least. Oh man. Well. Oh shoot! Hold on. Sorry, this is not. Why isn't my keyboard's not working? There we go.
Perfect. There's going to be, if you're an importer, you're going to see what the president's going to do as threats. That we think there are also going to be some opportunities on trade, negotiation of trade deals to provide market access, et cetera. But the focus is clearly going to be on countries we have trade deficits with and the unfairness that the president sees in the international trading system. So that's why there'll be a focus on, everyone talks about tariffs coming on China. We also think tariffs will be coming on Vietnam as well in the not too distant future. Megan, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can go into the details, and we can come back and wrap things up at the end.
Wonderful. So as Ron said, there's been a lot of talk of specific threats, if you will, that have started, I guess, at the beginning of his campaign and then were prevalent throughout and have continued until present day. So back to what Ron was saying previously, is we think that he uses tariffs for two things, either for economic leverage in a negotiation or to for a policy goal, or to correct, in his view at least, an economic imbalance. The current threats, or the most prevalent threats, are the first one of the 50 to 60% tariff on all Chinese goods, plus a 10 to 20% tariff on all 10 to 20% blanket tariff on all goods from all countries. And we believe this is to correct the economic imbalance of trade deficits. And we'll get into that in a second. Then there's the second one of I think it's 2 days before the election, or not 2 days, a month before the election. He talked about putting 200 to 500% on cars from Mexico. And we believe that's both a policy goal and an economic imbalance based off of his desire to curb Chinese investment and content of product that's being made in Mexico. You also saw this with, and this probably doesn't affect any of you guys, but there was recently a change to smelting and casting requirements for 232s on aluminum and steel. And we believe there could potentially be more than that. Next, in the most recent, I guess, threat, if you will, is the 25% imports on all products from Canada and Mexico, and then 10% additional on Chinese products. We believe this is purely a policy goal for the flow, or to curb the flow of fentanyl and also illegal immigration. And it complements the content and Chinese investment aspect, because obviously we're talking about Mexico again. And then lastly, the 100% on BRICS countries. This was, something he said based off of their an announcement saying that there's going to be a new currency, and then that currency if it was created, would undermine the US dollar. So as Ron kind of said earlier, President Trump loves trade deficits because he wants to correct those. And here is in 2003 are the countries with the largest. And if you see, it kind of matches up with his threats of, China, obviously 60% tariffs. Mexico has been repeatedly discussed. Vietnam, we'll get into that a little bit later. But then you have Germany, Japan, Ireland, Canada, and all these others that are, well, very, very far behind China, but they're still up there. From your guys' perspective, we believe that your biggest risk is that possibly on day one, or within the first, 10 days or so, that he is going to announce an increase of rates of tariffs on products on 4A. I believe a lot of your reels and maybe your artificial baits are on 4A, and then there's some that are still on 4B. But we likely think that right now it's 7.5%, that it would go up to 25%. Again, you can't quote us on this because we actually have no idea. It's completely up to them. And let's be honest, we can't predict the unpredictable. But that's just kind of our best guess. And then we also believe that he will impose new tariffs on list 4B. Now, again, that will be an announcement. It probably won't go into effect right away. But who knows? We also think there'll be action within the first 6 months on de minimis. Some of his team members that are going to be in Trump 2.0 that were with him under Trump 1.1 are back, and they have a true hatred for de minimis. So that is good for us. And we'll go into a little bit more detail of that later. Next is Mexico. I don't think you guys produce a lot in Mexico, but if you do, there is some, that's the second best threat, then Vietnam, and then the universal baseline. The universal baseline to us is the most unclear because we're a little, the authorities, which we'll go into a second, don't provide a good legal basis to levy these. However, as most of us know, Trump doesn't necessarily care about using things that are WTO illegal. So how can he do this? There are a number of different trade laws that are in existence that he could use. I've included the reason that these these laws could be invoked. So, for example, IEPA is an unusual or extraordinary emergency threat to national security, whereas Section 122 is a large or serious balance of payments of deficits, and that's only 150 days max time implementation. So these are all the tools in his toolbox that he could potentially use if he wanted to. And if you recall, under his first administration, he used 301, which is the China tariffs. He used 201, which are the solar cells, and he used a lot of 232s, which are the steel and aluminum. And lastly, but not least, you have Congress. So Congress still has a role within trade. They can rescind de minimis, as they've been discussing all year. They could restore and modify different preference programs that actually will allow you various options to mitigate these potential tariff actions if you're able to find producers in GSP countries or African countries. And last but not least, they could potentially revoke permanent national trade relations status, which we call PNTR. It's unlikely, but they still have the power to do that. If they did this for Russia, when was that? 2 years ago now, Ron? Something like that. But essentially what that means is instead of having different duty rates for each product that are applied throughout the world, you would have a much larger, almost 2 to 3 times duty rate that's applied to bad countries. So right now, the countries that do not have PNTR are Cuba and Russia and North Korea. right, next slide. Ron, do you want to talk a little bit about the trade team?
Sure. Well, here's the key economic appointees for the administration. I think they're all pretty safe for confirmation, and so we expect them to be serving in the administration. Two of the folks on this that have been nominated are well known to us. Peter Navarro is one of the people that served in the previous administration. He, in a meeting we had with him right before the pandemic, was focused on de minimis. He said the president really wants to get rid of de minimis. He said they would eventually get rid of de minimis. They did not do that in the first term, but we're pretty confident they will, at minimum, severely restrict access under de minimis. And I think we're in very good shape to achieve our policy objective, what we want to achieve on your products. Jameson Greer, he served as chief of staff to Bob Lighthizer in the first administration. He's an interesting pick. He's a great guy. I see him more as a conventional Republican on trade. But yet the president picked him and didn't pick Bob again because he didn't think Bob was bold enough. So I'm sure Jameson has some fairly ambitious ideas on what they're going to be doing on trade. Treasury always plays a role in trade. It depends on the administration, and so does the Commerce Department. Howard Lutnick, when he was nominated, the president said that he would be in charge of tariffs. Well, he certainly will be in charge of the 232 tariffs. It remains to be seen if he really will be in charge of the 301 tariffs. In previous administrations, there's been fights about who's going to control trade policy. Will it be the Secretary of Commerce or will it be USTR? In all of the previous fights, USTR has won that fight. And folks in Congress that have spoken up have said, we want to keep things as they are and we want to make sure that USTR and Jameson Greer is in control of trade policy. CBP, again, is an important player on the enforcement side, not so much on the policy side. For de minimis, it is important. We've been in close touch with them on the excise tax issue and, what are they actually doing to enforce the prohibition for products subject to the excise tax. Rodney Scott was in the previous Trump administration, and we believe he'll be very easy to work with.
One other thing to note here is that as you see the last four folks have all been previously in the administration under Trump. The Bessent and Lutnick have not, and they are considered more free trade, if you will, other than the other guys. And a lot of folks are talking about how these two are supposed to represent, the business industry's interests and kind of keep the other four to check. Now, again, we'll see how that plays out, because even since the nomination of Lutnick, which I believe happened late November to present day, he's already changed his tone a little bit, and is now reciprocity is the big buzzword that you're hearing a lot of, and that his plan. Ron already talked about this slide, but this is just talking about, again, who's actually going to lead. And it will be interesting if you guys recall, under the first administration, it was largely Trump himself making the, judgment call, but the announcements on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. So it will be, for me, it will be very, very interesting to watch. Is he going to still be the leading voice on that, or is he going to delegate it to one of these folks? And if he does delegate it, will one of these folks go through the traditional official, if you will, press release and FR notice, or will they announce it on social media, most likely to social first and get us all freaked out, and then issue the actual details? But that's, again, what I'm watching for, and you guys don't need to be worried about, because I'm going to analyze it for you. Well, Ron and I are. So that's, hey, Ron, can you take over for me for a second?
Yeah, thank you. So, we all know that there's going to be a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives. You might ask, why should we really care about Congress on trade, since the president has already been delegated a lot of authority, like on the 301s and 232s. But in the end of the day, the president, USTR, Secretary of Commerce have to work with the main committees of jurisdiction, the Finance Committee and Ways and Means Committee. They, even if they do not try to constrain the president on the authorities he has, they control the purse strings, they control the budget. And having served in 2 administrations, we've seen, that in action. When we did something Congress didn't like, they threatened to cut back USTR's budget by 50%. So the administration has to work with Congress, and they will. And we'll see as things evolve, Congress will have probably more and more say. So I think, the leadership's well known. I think we go to the next slide, Megan.
Yep.
So important, as I said, is the committees of jurisdiction. I think we're fairly fortunate to have the new members that have been added to the Ways and Means Committee. Aaron Bean from Florida, Max Miller from Ohio, Moran from Texas, and Rudy Yakum from Indiana. Rudy Yakum's been trying to get on Ways and Means since he's been in Congress, which is, I think, this is his 3rd term, maybe his 2nd. He's very familiar with the outdoor industry. He's comes from the district where RVs are made, and so he's been very, very supportive of pretty much all of our trade initiatives. And so again, very good that he's going to be on the Ways and Means Committee. The not so good might be on trade would be if Linda Sanchez actually becomes the ranking Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee for trade. She's very hawkish and very pro-labor, and tends to look at things as, if we're getting rid of tariffs, we're helping the big old bad private sector, helping wealthy Americans, and not helping the working person. So we'll see. She seems to be the leading candidate. That will have some influence, particularly given the very narrow margins that Congress have. But again, we're fortunate that Jason Smith and then Adrian Smith is the chairman of the trade subcommittee, and both are pretty big fans of the industry.
And moreover, Mike and I have had several meetings with various current Ways and Means members that will not be changing next year, including Vern Buchanan's office, who's from Florida, and they are ready to go and very excited that ASA is now involved in trade. And they are, we've almost had to talk them down because they're so hot to trot to help us with this de minimis excise tax issue. So next, last but not least, on the Senate side, we do have a lot of changes upcoming on membership there on the Democratic side, however, not on the Republican side. I say that because there's no departures from the Republican side, but there could be additional folks added. Because as you know, they're in the minority now, and they will assume the majority. So they'll likely add some people, but we're not sure exactly who or when, or if they will decide to do that. Or they could also decide just not to replace all 7 members who are will no longer be in Congress, including folks like Sherrod Brown, Bob Casey, Senator Cardin from Maryland, and then also Senator Carper. There's some other ones, but I don't think they're that important to your industry. One very interesting dynamic that will be fascinating to watch is Mr. Bernie Sanders has decided that he wants to join, and he has announced that he is going to join. And since he is pretty high up in seniority overall in the Democratic Party on the Senate, the general consensus is that they won't be able to tell him no, because a lot of committee membership, if you will, is selected based off of seniority. However, he will have to be voted on by this caucus. And I thought that, that picture, this is when he announced it, and it just sums it up of what I kind of think of his crazy antics, but that's all right. In addition to that, we're hearing rumors that a senator from Georgia and one from New Jersey are going to try to join. Again, they're going to be on the minority, so they won't have as much, if any, power compared to the Republicans, but still good for you guys to know, especially, fishing is obviously pretty big in Georgia. And but once we have that information, we'll know, and Mike and I will be on the Hill creating relationships with those. So most important to you guys is, how does this all impact your key trade issues? From a de minimis standpoint, and before I get into impact, I should say that when we started working with Mike, with ASA on de minimis, we were under the impression that products subject to excise tax that are collected at the border, which are alcohol and firearms, and cigarettes, were not eligible for de minimis. However, those with excise tax collected by the IRS were, simply because of the way that the regulations and the law is written. It's very, very confusing. So one afternoon, I spent about 5 hours and dug into the regulations, which was great fun. And I actually found that according to the regs, products subject to excise tax collected by the IRS, i.e. fishing, all the fishing equipment and archery equipment, are actually not eligible for de minimis. So as Ron indicated, we then talked to Customs, asked them if they had any idea about this. They were, how would you describe it, Ron?
Well, again, we were not the only ones under the impression that those goods were eligible for de minimis. It was frightening to find out that CBP also believed that goods subject to excise taxes collected through the IRS as opposed to at the border were eligible for de minimis. So they have not been enforcing the law. They pledged to take corrective action. They haven't gotten back to us yet on specifically what they would do, but they did say we will intend on issuing further guidance to the trade community that this is the case. But again, that's the problem with de minimis, is there's so many parts to the puzzle that even the enforcing agency is very confused about it. So, at least we've got their attention now. They know they should be enforcing it. The way de minimis is structured, it's really hard for them to enforce anything relative to de minimis. There's so many packages coming in. And
5 million a day right now.
How many, Megan?
5 million.
And they're really at the mercy of what's stated on the package, that, that's really what's in there. They can't inspect even a fraction of what's coming in. So that's going to all be part of the solution that Congress will work on next year with the administration. And as Megan said at the beginning, we think probably within the first 6 months there'll be a solution and a reform of de minimis, if it exists in any way at all.
And that's a good point, is we do not know at this point whether or not Congress will still take the lead on finding a reform solution, or whether or not the administration will take some action. The Biden administration has said that they plan on issuing, through the federal rulemaking process, new regulations that would preclude products subject to Section 301 tariff actions, and also would require additional data points. But that's the rulemaking process. That would take forever. And once the Trump administration comes in, they could scrap that, or they could build upon that, and this has been a discussion among trade wonks involved in de minimis, is there is part of the law that gives the authority to the Secretary of Treasury to take action to protect the revenue and the national security of the United States. I have always been under the belief, and again, I'm not an attorney, but the way it's written, that the Treasury Secretary could immediately say, sorry, but this is hurting our revenue. But again, we'll see what happens. I guess the summary, though, is that the preliminary meetings that Mike and I have had, based off of the letter that we sent, when was that? November, I believe. Yeah, early November, is that folks are very surprised about the difference between IRS and CBP collected, and they are very supportive of making sure that it is explicitly written under the statute that most people go to for de minimis regulation, or de minimis, I guess, eligibility, so that there's no longer any confusion. So I'm confident that we will, we'll be successful there. Now, next, but not least, is GSP. GSP is a program that its actually 50-year birthday is, I believe, January 4th or 5th or something like that. And it provides duty-free market access to products that are made in developing countries. This is a wonderful program to help get folks out of China, because as you all know, it is costly and difficult to produce in least developed countries, considering the lack of infrastructure and, just lack of know-how and skill and all that kind of stuff. We anticipate that it will be retroactively renewed. And I know if any of you have talked to us before, we've been saying that till we're blue in the face, but we truly believe it will be renewed at the end, or sometime in the mid to late summer, around the same time that AGOA is set to expire. Because, and Ron, maybe you can talk about Trump's history on GSP.
So GSP has been one of the trade programs that the previous Trump administration was very supportive of. One product area that I know some of you benefit from is like fishing tackle boxes, things that are considered travel goods. Those were added to GSP in 2016. And under the Obama administration, after the law was expanded to include travel goods, the Obama administration only granted duty-free to imports from least developed countries, like that would have covered Cambodia and Burma and a select few countries. It was actually the Trump administration that expanded GSP and gave duty-free benefits to all countries. And I know a lot of the all beneficiary countries, and I know a lot of the travel goods and tackle boxes, et cetera, are made in the Philippines and Indonesia. So those became duty-free in 2017. It also provides the president with leverage with the countries that are eligible, because they want to maintain their duty-free access to the U.S. market. So, for example, during the Trump administration, they revoked benefits for India. They were taken out of the program, and they've been working mightily, making concessions to the United States so they could get back in the program. So we anticipate that, as Megan said, this African Growth and Opportunity Act is due to expire in September of 2025. We think that will be what will propel GSP renewal, so probably renewed in July or September. And shortly after that, we expect India to be back in the program. So there's been some rumor, since the president loves tariffs, that's his favorite word. People then, they leap to the conclusion that, gee, he must not like GSP because that gives up duties on eligible countries. But they actually like the program. It does not give duty free to China. They're not eligible for GSP. It does not give duty free to Vietnam. They're not eligible. So again, we expect very positive interaction with the administration on GSP next year.
And this is one area that we'll talk about a little bit more in my last slide of what to do to prepare, but we think you should consider looking at if there are eligible sources in other countries, because most fishing products are in fact GSP eligible. I checked actually about an hour or so ago, and we're happy to do a separate, more into the weeds conversation about, or presentation about that with your sourcing folks, so that you can consider, different opportunities if there are had. So keep that in the back of your minds as you're going forward. Last but not least is the miscellaneous tariff bill. That is a temporary duty reduction or elimination program for products written at a very narrow definition. So if you remember, say like one of your products is reels under, I think, what, $8.50, something like that, we would write a provision that say reels under $6 that weigh, 2 ounces or whatever. That's just an example. So it's a very narrow definition for products that are not made in the United States to get duty-free treatment. That program has been expired the same time or as long as GSP has been, but it is a phenomenal opportunity to get some specific duty relief. Mike mentioned earlier that we worked with some of your member companies on MTBs a while back when they were eligible, and we had some pretty good success. Those were, I believe, we had some reels, and I don't know if my colleague Andy's on, but we successfully got some MTBs for some reels and then some artificial bait products. Unfortunately, because so many of them are imported, the duty was not eliminated, but what was just reduced. But regardless, you know, every little penny counts. So that's something to look forward to in the future of, and if that is resurrected, I will be knocking on your door with all kinds of details and talking to you all on how we can make that really beneficial for you guys. Last but not least, and Ron alluded to this earlier, we do believe that there are going to be opportunities, even though all you're hearing is threat tariffs. And that said, there'll be opportunities to remove or exclude products from various lists. Now I say that with the caveat, we don't know we don't have any insight if there will actually be an exclusion process for products on 4B or another one on 4A from China, or if there will be opportunities there. But we can only assume that there will be if more countries are added. So say Vietnam is targeted for 3-1 tariffs, what would happen is, and I believe there's a lot of production of fishing equipment in Vietnam, at least from the import data, they would propose a list of HTS codes. You guys would tell us what's most important, which is probably pretty relevant, or not relevant, pretty obvious since you only make up a very small portion of the tariff code. And then we would volunteer Mike to sit in front of the 301 committee to explain how this would impact our industry and ask for, or give all the reasons why fishing equipment should not be included in this list. And again, that's more issue specific and technical that we would get into if the event happen, or if it presents itself. But there will be opportunities. So whenever announcements are made, I can only ask you to please not freak out immediately, and call us or call Mike, and we will make sure that there's some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. That said, there's also going to be a review of the UMCA. This is part of the agreement, or an integral into the agreement, where it has to be reviewed starting in 2026. I expect, and from my conversations with a former USTR person who's now at Commerce, that USTR will start looking for public input in 2025. And this will be anywhere from what's working for the industry, what's not working. And so say, for example, if you guys moved any of your reel assembly or to Mexico, and for some reason it's not, the rule of origin is not allowing you to get duty-free treatment because, one thing or another, those are the type of things that we would want to let USTR know so that we could potentially get it fixed. Or if there's any other issues or potential opportunities that we identify as a way forward. And again, your industry is expected to be very supported by the Trump administration, or incoming Trump administration. And so I think that we try to be as creative as possible. And even if you're just thinking of, oh, well, maybe I can move this, but this particular rule inhibits it, let's tell them, because, the ultimate goal is to move product back to the United States, or at the very least nearshoring. Last but not least, so Trump has been very consistent with the fact that he prefers bilateral agreements versus multilateral agreements. If you remember, when he came on board in 2016, the industry the industry had been working for years on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and he immediately said, nope, we're not doing this. I want to focus on bilaterals. And we think that one of the countries that he will focus on a bilateral with is the Philippines. And Ron, can you provide a little bit more, I guess,
Well, we're
historical
down
background on that?
to less than 20 minutes. Mike, do you want to jump
Oh,
into
yeah.
questions or should we continue on?
We only have one more slide, Mike.
Yeah, I think we're just about done. So yeah, we can go ahead and wrap up and move to questions.
So last but not least, that you're all asking is how to prepare. From a technical perspective, and this is where I come in and your sourcing and customs folks come in, is that I think you should do a review of your 2023 and 2024 year-to-date imports to assess where your top risks are, both by value and by quantity, and then look at it by products and also by country of origin. So then we'll get a better understanding of, okay, we don't care about Mexico, we don't care about Vietnam, or yes, we really care about Vietnam and we don't care about what have you. Also, as you guys know, lead times are anywhere between 6 months and 2 years. So I would talk to product teams about what's scheduled to hit the market over the next few years, so you can understand how this will impact you. And then lastly, well, actually 2 things. One, we've noticed that especially smaller companies, classification is very difficult and is very nuanced. And if you are not a trained person in this world, it's, you know, very overwhelming. So I would suggest doing an audit of your classifications, of the accuracy, and also country of origin. For example, the country of origin rules of origin gets very convoluted in the fact of, say, a tent. The country of origin is not where the fabric is made, but it is where it's assembled. Versus other products, it's where the fabric is made. So weird things like that are out there and folks may not know. And last but not least, and what we were talking about earlier, is I think if once you've done all your kind of import assessment and say you discover that 60% of your product is coming in from China, let's look at those products to see, okay, is it eligible for GSP? Are there any countries or producers in GSP countries that we could look to potentially make this stuff to receive reduced duty or eliminated duty in that one. So that's all I got, Mike. You guys have any questions? Lots of questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ron and Megan. Tons of great intel. As folks can tell, Ron and Megan really know this space extremely well. I'm, as a fisheries science background person, slowly drinking from a fire hose, trying to get caught up. But you know, it seems that there's a lot of both risk and also opportunity for our industry to engage more in this space. Make sure that we are looking out for everyone's best interests here. Again, as Megan and Ron have mentioned, we're already fairly active on a couple of these issues, especially de minimis and the excise tax slippage issue of ensuring that products come in direct to consumer from overseas through third-party online marketplace facilitators. There's a mechanism to collect the excise tax on that. But GSP, MTB, a lot of these other programs, again, seem like areas that our industry can and should be playing a pretty big role in. So we look forward to that over the coming years, as there will be a ton going on in this space. So again, if folks have questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or if you want to do the raise hand feature, I can call on you. I saw Ron ask, will you send a link for the video? Yes, we will post this, send it out to everyone. We'll also send the slide deck around. Folks want to share that around. Surely there are some questions.
Hey, you're letting us off easy.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah, Mike, I think it would be good to know too, as we get into next year, obviously we know the importance of de minimis and what we need to do to rectify that situation. GSP, again, is going to be very active. So it'd be good to know, if you don't already know, Mike, maybe you're aware of what of your companies are using GSP and for what products. That's important information. Did we confuse everyone so much? They don't know what to ask.
So a couple finally came in. So from Ricky Geese, hey Ricky, good to have you on here. Where do tariff collections go if not considered the excise tax? Um,
Any new tax, like the 301 taxes, et cetera, go to the general treasury. In fact, the vast majority of tariffs, the normal tariffs, as well as trade remedy tariffs like 301, the 232s that Megan referenced. I think you really are very unique
So,
because
how you
some of
doing?
your tariffs do go to the trust fund, and that's several industries have tried to tie the tariffs from their industry to specific programs related to the industry, and no one else I know of, I'm sure there may be one or two other examples, have been successful. So the answer is tariffs generally go to the overall treasury and then dispersed as the government wishes to disperse it.
yeah, and that was a point when we engaged in China tariffs, 301 tariffs during the first Trump administration. The point we tried to make was, first and foremost, we strongly prefer you not to go forward with these additional tariffs. At a minimum, though, if you do, because the pre-existing import duties on fishing equipment were going into the Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund, at least have the additional tariffs go in there as well. We were not successful on that point, but might be something where we dust off.
Yeah, I think we should
Uh,
dust it off because actually I've been reading grumblings about potential of if there's new tariffs levied that Congress will insist, which again, who knows if they'll actually be successful, but they'll probably try to ensure that those tariffs are go into a separate fund that could be then distributed to folks if there are retaliatory tariffs placed back on. So I think that's a great idea, Mike, to keep in our back pocket if it comes through.
So from Ron Stallings, please explain de minimis better. I could try, but I bet Ron or Megan could really do it better than I could.
Well, let me try. Megan knows the law better than anyone, I think, in the country. But de minimis is a law that's been in place for numerous years that allows imports to enter the U.S. free of duties, free of 301 tariffs, free of, as we found, not free of excise tax, although they probably are, and free of income tax. If it's up to $800 per day for an individual. That was increased from $200 to $800 in 2016. And it was for commercial purposes, not used as heavily as it is today since the pandemic. The pandemic really propelled e-commerce. People started discovering what de minimis was. A lot of Chinese pure plays started realizing, gee, these China tariffs may work to our advantage because it's the poor U.S. importer that has to pay them if we send our product directly from China to the U.S. consumer, provided it's under $800 per day, and 90% of de minimis shipments are under $800, or e-commerce shipments are under $800 per day. There's no duty exposure at all. So it's really hurting American companies that are playing by the rules, that are distributing product from U.S. warehouses, and that's why it's going to have to change. I don't know. Is
Yeah,
that
the only
clear, do
thing
you
I
think?
would add, I was going to add is, Ron, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what a 7501 is. That's what you file when you're bringing in your product from any other country. And it's a customs entry form where you'll say, I am bringing in, 1,800 fishing reels. Here's the duty amount, and it goes into this electronic database called ACE. And through that, it will auto-populate, okay, fishing reels are subject to, and I know that they're not, but CPSC regulations and FDA regulations and all this stuff. And the paperwork that is required with de minimis does not include that. So that's why, one, we don't know what all's coming in de minimis. We don't know if these products are safe, which is why we're getting all the fentanyl concerns. And also, you can't apply a duty if you don't know what the product is. And right now, the US law doesn't require you to say what the product is by a number. It says you're supposed to give a description, but people give descriptions like Batman or all kinds of weird things. And I'm saying Batman because on CBP's website right now of what not to use. and discarding it. So hopefully that explains it better.
Yeah, I've certainly stopped long ago buying cheap fishing tackle on Amazon. But I'm still guilty of buying a lot of other cheap crap on Amazon, and de minimis is certainly playing a role in why that stuff is so cheap at the moment, and probably not for long. So Richard Fisher asked an interesting question. Based on where stuff comes from, what are some of the fishing related products that are most at risk of getting tariffed? Um, I would say probably all of them, but some of that gets down to which list you're on, 4A, 4B. And I don't know, Ron, Megan, if you all have any insights on how you think those lists are going to carry over, the extent to which rates may differ depending on what list you're on. All bets are off if there's going to be different criteria based on which HTS codes go where. Any insights?
Yeah, I'd say, well, number one, everything from China is at risk, regardless of what list you're on. And I could see things eventually kind of leveling off at a 50% across the board tariff, provided China does not negotiate with the US. That's the other part of this equation is the president will engage the Chinese government. As you saw, he invited President Xi to come to the inauguration. He does want to engage in a negotiation. His hope is he can convince the Chinese to buy a lot more American products, then he will go lighter on tariffs. So that's one of the unknowns that will play out into the new year. But again, you have to assume everything you import from China is at risk of a significantly higher tariff. Vietnam will be at risk too as next year progresses. There is a 301 case that the Trump administration initiated before they left that the Biden administration put on hold. That almost certainly because of the trade deficit that Megan highlighted earlier in the presentation, the president will revive. And I think, though, we'll be able to maneuver those a little better than we can maneuver through the Chinese tariffs. There will be an exclusion process, et cetera. So we'll work hard to get any exclusions that are necessary. That's probably a more of like end of 2025, early 2026 issue.
John, to your question, and please talk if you can. If you're talking about a German-made engine, German-made engines right now don't have any extra tariffs on them. So you would pay the normal tariff, but you're not going to pay an extra tariff. Now, if it's from China, then yes, you would pay an extra tariff on top of the normal tariff. But to your question about the exemption process, there have been several exemption processes under 301s, and there are about 380 some odd exclusions that currently exist that are good until May 2025, that there'll likely be a process to ask for those to be re-upped. I don't know if engines are on that, but we can certainly look if you have a specific other question. For 232s, that's my colleague's Akshay's specialty, but there's also an exclusion process for that as well. That's different and that's ongoing. And I believe those are only for 1 year at a time. But that's what Ron was just talking about for, say, if a Vietnam tariff 301 case comes about, is that you'll have an opportunity to say, please don't put an extra tariff on this product, or don't put an extra tariff on that product. And hopefully the incoming administration will be more sympathetic to what you're talking about for, imported components for made in USA production, which, by the way, you could potentially use a foreign trade zone on that. So we should talk about separately. If you want to just email me and we can talk.
All right. I certainly read Ron's
Well,
comment about offering me cheap or not cheap fishing equipment. So Ron, I may follow up with you, but we can skip over that one. Eric Nag, a good question. I recall this coming up during the last round, but can't remember the answer to it. What's the implementation or enforcement time from when the tariffs get announced to when they go into effect? What would be the expectation?
Vary. It varies every time. It is our expectation that he could potentially, under the 301 statute, add the new tariff to 4B pretty quickly without doing another investigation. And then when that action is announced in the actual notice, it will say, you know, products, this will go into effect at, usually it's like 11:59 p.m. per blah, blah, once it's entered into consumption. So if it's on, so hypothetically, if your product is on the water and it gets here before that implementation time, then you're fine. But if it doesn't get here before that implementation time, so that's actually a good question of preparation. There's a lot of folks that are stockpiling Chinese product right now, which has caused some congestion at our ports. I'm sure you guys are all aware of that. Just anticipation of new China tariffs.
And then Ricky commented on the Salt Kennedy Fund, which Megan and Ron, I'd be pleasantly surprised if you all were aware of that, but I certainly am. And Ricky, we could maybe talk offline. I actually serve on the advisory committee that oversees where those funds are going. I'm one of 2 recreational people on it in a sea of commercial fishing folks, including several from Alaska you probably are very familiar with. But one important thing to note, though, even though statute dictates a certain percent, 30% of these duties going into the SK fund, Congress ends up appropriating significantly less into it. At least it has in recent years. I think this past funding cycle was only 5 million, which is a whole lot less than what 30% of import duties are. So a lot to be done there on that program, but that's part of this advisory committee's role, is to advocate for both more funding and then make sure the money's actually going where it should be, which again, being one of 2 recreational folks on it, it's an uphill battle to fight. We've got about 2 minutes left here if anyone has any lingering questions.
I'd say going back to the last question, which is on everyone's mind, we know the tariffs are coming, but when? There's not a lot of clarity, and the president likes it that way. I mean, that's intentional because he believes that gives him most negotiating leverage with foreign countries, because everyone likes order and likes clarity. I'd have to say my best guess is that if they do announce additional tariffs on China on Inauguration Day, I would say about May 1st would be the earliest I would expect them to go into place. But again, the president said Bob Lighthizer wasn't bold enough, so it's a question mark.
Well, Ron, Megan, that's why it's great for us to have you all on our team this time around to help us navigate this better, tariffs and as many other topics. And for everyone on here, hopefully you come away recognizing that we've got a lot more capacity at ASA to navigate this space. So hopefully can be much more effective, but also recognize we've got, a lot of factors at play here that will be, changing by the minute. Will be requiring a lot of vigilance, but look forward to future engagement from you all to help us at ASA better understand what are the issues affecting your business industry. What countries, what products do we need to be paying particularly close attention to? We need that information from you all. So please reach out if you've got any questions, concerns, thoughts that we can help with. This is a space we know we need to operate more in. And again, are glad we've got Ron, Megan, and team to help us do that. So, and Ricky, yes, I will reach out to you. We talk more offline. I will send the slides around. We will post this video if you or others in your company want to look at these materials, and we'll certainly be available if folks have questions and want to talk more offline. But with that, Ron, Megan, any parting thoughts?
Not for me.
Good luck. We're here to help you navigate.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great Christmas, happy holidays, and look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you.